things were done around here, and some of the other people on the panel said, "Wait a minute, you're part of the team, you're part of the group now. You got to take. You've been here now 2 years, so you think you got anything done this first time around?"
You know, I think we got a lot accomplished. This is the first time in history of the country that we actually started about spending cuts. We started about reining in the size of government. So that was a huge win. Now, also, this last debate we just had, getting permanent tax relief to 99.3% of the American people was huge. And I go back to Chairman Camp has talked about tax reform, and we're talking about a tax code that's 10 times bigger than the Bible with none of the good stuff. We have to get serious about this spending cut and getting this trajectory of spending down. And if we don't, we are walking away from a pledge to the American people. And listen, I'm a Republican. Matt and Rick are with me today. But more than anything else, we're Americans. And if we want America's future to be bright, if we want America's future to be the future that we had growing up, listen, my dad was a World War II guy. He didn't want to go fight, but he had to. We're at a point right now where we have to address this spending in a really adult manner. And I keep hearing about we need to get more adults at the table. Well, you can get as many adults at the table as you want, but the conversation has to be an adult conversation.
Well, let's see what that conversation is then. Now, you fellows were here before. Now you come back. You've had a chance to look at this thing from afar. What do you think they've been doing since you left?
Well, honestly, I think that we've got to take the bull by the horns now. It's been 4 years under the same administration, and we've never even really opened a serious discussion about fixing Social Security and Medicare. And that makes me lose sleep. Honestly, we deserve a lot better. Social Security will go bust within about 10 years. Medicare in 10 years, and then Social Security not far behind. And we have a moral responsibility. I have a 90-year-old mother that depends on that. We've got to fix that. And if we don't address these spending issues now, when Republicans have the leverage, then when? In the last 4 years, nothing's been done. There hasn't been a budget passed by the Senate in 4 years. $1 trillion deficits every year. If not now, then when?
Bob, you and others have talked about what's different between now and then. And I think that's a great question. This Congress worked 32 out of the 52 weeks last year. My first term, we worked 48 out of the 52 weeks. There's a couple things I think we need to do to change the process, to change the way we do politics. First of all, money has become too dominant. We went through $20 million in my election contest. That's toxic, it's obscene, and it's taking away from the time that we were elected to govern. Members of Congress now, to be successful, are expected to spend 30 hours a week in call time, dialing for dollars. That's time that we need to go to work 4 or 5 days a week, like the other people in this country do. Put the legislative process, the committees back together. Have a process where things evolve and there's cooperation, collaboration, compromise, where you get to know each other.
Let me just point this out. We're talking about you need to get back to work. I never heard of anybody that got a job and the first 2 weeks they went on vacation. That's exactly what has happened here with the Congress. Senators, what do you think about that? That doesn't sound like a sense of urgency there. Everybody gets elected, and oh my gosh, this thing is just terrible. We got to do something, so we'll see you in a couple of weeks. What about that, Senator Flake?
Well, no, agreed. I'd love to get back. We talk about having a conversation. I think we've had plenty of conversations. We need to cut spending, and whether it's the framework that Erskine Bowles put forward, or any number of frameworks or other reasons to just cut spending. I mean, we've got to do it. We are in control now in the Congress, but pretty soon we won't be. The markets will react, and we'll be looking like and acting like some of these European countries that have an austerity program imposed on them. We want to avoid that, and so I think it behooves us to get to work now.
All right, well, Senator Murphy, what's the first thing you ought to do then? What if you could just make a magic wish here and get something done, what's the first constructive thing that could be done here to get this thing going again?
Well, listen, I think we should shoot for that grand bargain. I think we should look at a deficit reduction, a debt reduction deal that's in the neighborhood of $3 trillion or $4 trillion. And I think the American people are where President Obama is, that they want it to be an equal mix of spending cuts and of some increased revenue coming in from people that can afford it. But let's be honest about this conversation about Medicare, right? I mean, Democrats put on the table $500 billion of Medicare spending reductions in the health care reform bill, and Republicans went out and attacked Democrats on it in the 2010 election. So Democrats have been willing to have conversations about spending reductions. We just haven't had a lot of partnership on this. I think there's a lot of common ground here on Medicare or Social Security if we're willing to put politics aside and come to the table. But let's get that big deal done early on. It gets harder to do as you get closer to elections. And if you really want to unlock this economy, if you want to make the United States the place where world capital comes to, let's do a deal and let's do it early.
All right. Well, let me just ask you all this. They're talking about now, Senator Cornyn, in an op-ed piece yesterday in one of the Houston papers, said that Republicans have to be willing to say, yes, we're going to shut down part of the government if we can't get the kind of spending cuts we need. Is that really a good idea?
You know, I see no reason to shut down the government. Both sides agree that spending is a problem. So if we came here to fix things, then let's not polarize it right off the bat. Let's talk about the president agrees. He said we need to get spending under control. Both Republicans and Democrats agree. Now, let's get started on it now. Let's start working in that direction. I think, you know, when you try to set up an obstacle right away, you create a problem. Now, I would tell you this. Spending cuts have got to come in. And if our credit rating goes down, it's not because we didn't pay our bills. It's because we haven't addressed the future. And looking at a nation right now that is the trajectory of our debt, Bob, runs us off a cliff that's much bigger than the fiscal cliff. So we better get that under control. With the assets that we have, we can do it. It's
Bob,
there.
Nobody disagrees with that, but it's how do you get it done?
Bob, I'd like to interject maybe a little bit of a different thought, because I was here during the government shutdown in 1995. It was a divided government. We had a Democrat president of the United States. We had a Republican Congress. And I believe that that government shutdown actually gave us the impetus as we went forward to push toward some real serious compromise. I think it drove Bill Clinton in a different direction, a very bipartisan direction. In fact, we passed welfare reform for the first time ever, and we cut the welfare ranks in the last decade and a half by over 50%. These are good things. We also balanced the budget for the first time in 40 years in 1997, 1998, 1999. And when I left, we had over a $230 billion surplus. This was with a Democrat president, a Republican.
So you think that's a good idea?
Yes, I do. Yes, I think it's about time.
Yeah, Bob, I think it would be terribly irresponsible. Every one of these dollars that was spent was approved by the Congress of the United States. And call me old-fashioned, I'm a businessman. You spend the money, you got to pay the bills. And the last thing we ever want to do is to essentially declare the United States of America bankrupt. That would just be terrible. It would be devastating. We can't do that.
Well, Senators, let me ask you, just yes or no. If it takes shutting down the government to get spending in line, would you be in favor of that, Senator Flake?
Well, it shouldn't take that, but we've got to cut spending, and we've got to use whatever leverage point. I would agree that the debt limit is not the optimal leverage point to use, but we've got to use everything at our disposal to actually cut spending, and nothing has worked so far, and so whatever we can do to cut spending, we've got to do.
Senator Murphy?
Yeah, absolutely not. I mean, there's way too many people in Washington who sort of just view this whole thing as a game. They're going to shut down the government, or they're going to abrogate our debt ceiling just to get what they want. Those things have real consequences. There are people that rely on those government programs. There's investment that doesn't come to the United States because of the fiasco that it creates. We should absolutely take the debt ceiling off the table as a leverage point and a government shutdown off the table, and just stop viewing this as just political theater and, you know, get down to solving the problem.
Let me just shift to something else. Senator McConnell said this morning he thought that this is the argument's going to take up about the first third of the Congress. Sure. But you've also got this gun issue out there. What's going to happen on this?
Well, listen, I think everybody's concerned about the gun issue. And there's more elements than just one element. In my lifetime, I've seen things change completely. When I was going to school, they used to worry about you chewing gum. Now they worry about you bringing guns into school. We have to address it the same way we've addressed everything else in society. We're much more vulnerable now for a lot of reasons, not just one reason. So I think when we talk about that, we need to look across the board what the changes could be that would protect the most vulnerable people in our society. Certainly, schools right now are very vulnerable. We have to do things to protect them.
Would you be willing, Congressman, to think about reinstating the ban on assault weapons?
Bob, but what I'm interested in, I'm looking to see what everybody has to say right now. And once we get a chance to look at that, put it all out on the table, look at it. The framework is what's important. How are we going to protect the most vulnerable people in our society?
What about
Bob?